the Black London taxi, an iconic symbol of London. Indeed, when you come into Heathrow Airport from other parts of the world, amongst the symbols of our great country, you see Black London cabs. So it's an image that means something. And our taxi drivers have to do something called the knowledge, which is laborious, incredibly hard work. They have to know virtually every nook and cranny of London. It takes them, I think, about 4 years of real hard work to get to that standard. And that's why, we have had, I think, over the years, by far the best taxi drivers of any city in the world, albeit they're quite opinionated if you've got a well-known face. But other than that, I've always thought they were great. But of course the world changes, the world moves on. We all know that and understand that. We've always had, or for many, many years, licensed minicabs, and it's the advent of Uber, I think, that has thrown the whole thing up into the air. Now, a report has been issued by the Free Market Adam Smith Institute. It suggests that the knowledge is now outdated. We've got ways, we've got all sorts of, means of using sat-navs to get around the capital. And their other suggestion is that Uber and firms like this should be able to use the bus and taxi lanes. And the author of the report, Maxwell Marlowe, joins me. I'm also joined by Steve McNamara, General Secretary of the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association. Gentlemen, good evening. So, Maxwell, let's just think about this. So let me just recall with you an Uber experience I had. So I was in central London, wanted to get back to the outer London-Kent borders. An Uber was ordered for me. I got in the back. The guy did not speak any English. I mean, no English. He clearly had my postcode, a rural postcode, and sat-nav in rural areas is notoriously useless. And he started taking me in completely the wrong direction. And we're going along the Thames, heading out through the Blackwall Tunnel, and it's a massive loop round from a journey. And I was sort of raising my voice and kind of knocking on. But I couldn't make any connection with them at all. I did think about jumping out at the lights. I've also had Uber experiences that have been very, very good. But when it comes to actual knowledge of getting around London, Uber can't compete with the black cab driver, can it?
Well, you should really speak to a representative of Uber to take up your complaint. And I did try to come to the studio with a black cab, but none was available. So there are different ways of looking at this.
But there's an app, isn't there? Where you can get. I mean, you can use an app.
Would be the app for.
But you can use an app for black cabs as well as you can use an app.
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
and those do exist.
Yeah.
But tried ringing them up, nowhere to be seen. It's not the only issue, but we do have a real fall in the number of black cabs in London. I think the TfL put the numbers at a fall of 11% over the past 10 years, whereas the number of private hire vehicles have gone up 40% in the past 10 years.
So you're arguing there is a demand-supply issue, and fine, we can talk about that, but my point to you was that when you get into a black London cab, he or she generally know where to go because they put the hard yards in. Can a sat-nav compete with that?
I think it can. I think we've seen you made the point about the rural areas. We've seen a really good rollout of 4G and 5G across rural areas, which has helped basically supply this. We have great apps like Waze, which is a community-led app which basically puts together thousands of pieces of knowledge about slow roads, construction sites, red traffic lights, green traffic lights, all across London simultaneously. The knowledge just can't compete with that. No matter how much money you spend and how long you spend.
Steve, I mean, there is a point here, that Waze actually is pretty good.
Look, Nigel, the reality is these sat-navs are quite good, but the bottom line is if you leave here this evening and you're driving yourself, you don't turn it on because you know where you're going. And that's why we don't need a sat-nav, because we know where we're going. and sat-navs are a poor substitute for the knowledge. But I think the wider issue here is, Maxwell tells you that you need to take it up with Uber. Of course, one of the questions is who sponsors the Adam Smith Institute? And I think we all know the answer to that is Uber funded this report, and it's an Uber published document. And it's very interesting that some of the terminology...
That doesn't necessarily make it wrong.
No, it doesn't, but people tend to fund things, they want to say what they want to say, don't they?
Yeah, I get that.
And of course, some of the terminology he uses in there, he's telling us about the benefits of dynamic pricing. Well, dynamic pricing is what the general public know as surge pricing. And so what happens when it gets a bit busy, they charge you more. I mean, the prime example was the London Bridge attacks. My members are going there to take people home for nothing, and Uber is surge pricing them and charging them 10 times normal fare. That is what happens. So we either put all our eggs in a $70 billion American company that's never made a penny and keeps losing money, by the way, or we recognise that licensing in the UK, because part of Maxwell's report is that we should virtually scrap all licensing rules and regulations and it should be a free for all.
But he says he couldn't get a black cab to come
Well, I managed to get one quite easily. I walked out of my
You've got
office
your
in
own.
Southwark. No, well, I walked out of my office in Southwark and put my hand up. Look, if I want to go to the theatre on Saturday night to see the latest, whatever the trendiest West End show is, I'm not going to see it. But that's not an argument for having a theatre on every street corner so that we can all go on a Saturday evening. The bottom line is there are issues with supply and demand on any service.
But your argument really here is you know where you're going, that makes you a better and safer driver than somebody following a Saturday.
Absolutely. And of course the key issue is we have got the best safety record in the world. 38% of London's taxi fleet is now electric. We've got members investing £3.5 million a week in buying 50 electric cabs to provide the only wheelchair accessible, the only fully disabled access vehicles anywhere in the world. London has not just got the best cab service in the world, it's got the safest and the greenest. And why would we want to change that?
Now, when it comes, and I think the most controversial part of your report is this. You're suggesting that Uber or other firms like Uber should be able to use the bus and taxi lanes in London. I mean, presumably, if that happened, it would clog those lanes up to the point where it might be quite difficult for the buses to move around.
Certainly a valid point, but at that point I kind of say, well, why should the taxis have priority over the Ubers? And if I can very quickly say...
let me just answer that very quickly, because they give a superior service, and that's what you're paying
if
for.
that were the case, Nigel,
Yep.
they wouldn't be, falling in demand. Whereas as we had a great piece of reporting a few months ago from the New York Times saying 20,000 more drivers are needed for Uber to keep up with that surging demand they have. The public vote with their purse, and the purse is saying
there are
Uber.
not enough black cabs to satisfy the demand. What's happening, Steve? Are you all retiring?
No, we're not all retiring, Nigel. I mean, obviously, you're taking figures pre-pandemic and post-pandemic.
Yeah.
My members had, and indeed the private hire industry had the worst pandemic ever, and no one was moving. Firstly, let me tell you why we can use bus lanes is because we're hailable from the street, so you need to be able to pull into the bus lane.
And his report suggests that actually Uber and others should
and
have
his
that
report
same.
also suggests that we should do away with wheelchair accessibility and stuff like that. Well, you're suggesting that we use our cabs to take tourist rides. The reality is that the reason we can use bus lanes is because we're easily identifiable, we can be held by the street, and we know where we're going. The private hire industry use a plethora of vehicles. You say it's the most dangerous aspect. The most dangerous aspect of Maxwell's suggestion is that anybody from anywhere in the world with any form of driving licence, not just a UK or a Northern Ireland licence, but any form of driving licence from anywhere in the world, many places you buy a driving licence, could turn up in the UK, drive on the wrong side of the road to them and take people for hire and reward. I mean, frankly, it's laughable.
It's a fair point.
I don't think it is.
No,
I really
go on.
don't. How many cases do we have, apart from that one American security officer who drove on the wrong side of the road happening in the UK? It's really not that much. And I must say, you are misrepresenting the report massively.
Maxwell,
you said we want to get rid of all licensing and regulations. We do not. I argue very clearly we need a robust, transparent...
But Maxwell, what you're arguing is the service offered by Uber is equal to that offered by London black taxis. You're arguing these things are equal and therefore should both have the same rights and privileges.
I really think the public should make their mind up on that, and that's what they're doing. The thing is that
they're not, Maxwell. That's just the fact. The bottom line is that we've never been busier than we are at the moment. The taxi industry in London is having a massive boom.
Absolutely.
And of course, what you say is when Maxwell's arguing it, he's been paid to argue it, and that's the bottom line.
Is that
here.
Maxwell? Answer the charge.
Well, I mean, are
There
you
you go. There you go.
being paid to argue your point? The point
There's
is,
no doubt that Steve is acting in his self-interest, and we fully understand
And I
that.
put my hands up to
and
that.
his job is to represent other black taxi drivers.
Absolutely, as he
And
should.
clearly you're representing an economic interest of the Adam Smith Institute. But I tell you what, chaps, it's a fascinating debate. It's not going to go away. The next time you come back, we'll talk about Sadiq Khan and his role in all of this.
Happy to do so.
This one will run and run. Gentlemen, thank you both
you.
very much